All right, welcome back to the Exceptional Sales Leader Podcast. Darren Mitchell here, and I have another very special guest today. And the special guest is Mr. Ben Lai. How are you, my friend?
Very good. Thanks, Darren. Thanks for having me.
And we were just talking before, and for those of you who are listening to this, we're doing this over Zoom, and Ben has arrived on Zoom in a beautiful red jumper, and it's which actually matches the background because you've got a nice office background with some nice green plants. So there's lots of good contrast, mate.
Thank you. I'm not known for my fashion sense, but every now and then I get it right.
Absolutely. So for those of you who are interested in watching the YouTube version, please at some stage go to YouTube because this interview will be on the YouTube channel. So just look at tag either Darren Mitchell, Exceptional Sales Leader, or of course, Ben Lai, and you'll be able to see the fabulous red jumper that I'm talking about. So Ben, hey, thanks for jumping on, mate. We've been connected for a little while now, and we actually spoke based on a mutual colleague of ours, Tiffany Cook, who also runs a podcast, Roll with the Punches. But when she introduced us, I actually looked in and thought, hang on, we're actually already connected.
Yeah, I have made quite a lot of effort to reach out to like-minded individuals, and that includes sales leaders. And yeah, so I'm really glad to be connected with an individual like yourself. And what one can look at it and say, oh, we're competitors, but really there's so much business out there for everyone. Everybody needs sales training, so I'm more than happy to connect with other trainers.
Mate, it's a really interesting comment you made because another colleague, a guy called Mark LeBusque, he also does a podcast and he's a trainer. He does the human experience, and he was doing a lot of interviews with people who the listeners were saying, "Oh, Mark, how come you're interviewing a competitor? Doesn't that actually mean that there's less opportunity and less business for you?" And he said, "No, like." How big is the world, right? And how many customers are out there? How many businesses are out there? So my view is, hey, the more that we can talk about sales and sales leadership, the more we can get the message out there. Who's to say that my method is the right method? Who's to say with respect your method is the right method? It's just the method. But the more we can get the message out there, the better it is for everybody. So hey, I'm more than happy to talk to competitors.
Absolutely. And it's really encouraging to see that most sales trainers now are following the ethical mindset. And that's going to lift the profession as a whole. And the more trust and good practice there is out there, the easier it's going to be to make transactions, and it's better for our economy.
Oh, absolutely, mate. And I love the fact you mentioned ethics there, because we are going to talk about your organization, Sales Ethos. And we're going to talk about ethics, particularly in selling. We'll also love to touch on introversion in selling, because I know you've done a few videos and you've got some thoughts on that. And we'll talk about LinkedIn as well. But just on the ethics side, I'd love your take on this. I've been in sales for like 20 plus years. And when you talk to a lot of people who are not necessarily in sales and you ask them the question, what do you think of sales and how do you think of salespeople? Ethics is not necessarily at the top of the list. And I'm not sure about you, but we need to be, and I'm certainly on a mission to change the narrative around that, because I believe it can be one of the most ethical professions on the planet, because it's the way that we serve people, and what we're there to do is solve problems. So what's your take on that? And we'll lead that into a conversation about, your background.
Yeah, absolutely. It is unfortunate that there are still many other people out there who are being pushed into sales roles or pushed to use pushy tactics, especially with the telesales. We get all those spam calls, or you might be walking in the shopping center and get approached and get some product shoved in your face. The truth is, I think most of these people don't want to do these techniques, but they're being forced to by their bosses. And it's very unfortunate, because it creates a negative taste in our mouth, and that seeps into our subconscious. And if it's not addressed, when we go out and sell, we think to ourselves, oh, I don't want to be like those people. And so we actually sabotage ourselves. We sabotage our success. So it's very important to be mindful of that and to address those negative connotations before we actually go out and learn all the sales techniques.
Absolutely. And a lot of that points to what we're being taught, what sort of models we have to follow, and what we are taught to believe, pretty much, in terms of you. Yeah. And when you talk about telesales and some of the organizations that have lots of telemarketers, but also the door-to-door people, they're pretty much told, hey, close, always be
Yeah.
closing. Here's the script. When they say this, say this. When they say this, say that. Look for the opportunity to flog the product. In other words, take that square peg and try to jam it into a round hole.
It's actually funny you mentioned door knocking, because in Victoria, we've got these stickers that we can put on our doors that says no door knocking. My dad has one. And then so when I come knocking at his house, he opens the door and says, sorry, no salespeople.
That's okay, Dad. I'm not a salesperson. I'm a sales trainer.
We're all salespeople at the end of the day, Darren.
We are, mate. We are. That's so true. And I mean, I actually recorded a podcast about that. So we're all salespeople, no matter what role you're doing. You're always selling an idea or selling yourself. And I say, well, you know what? If you've got a partner, at some stage, one of you got sold.
Yes. Preferably both at the same time.
That's it. So let's take it on board and embrace the fact that we are in sales. Hey, for the listeners that are currently plugging into this, love to get a bit of a background on Ben. So I know that it wasn't necessarily the stereotypical background that led you into sales, but it's a really interesting background nonetheless. Would you like to just share a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. From a young age, I've always wanted to do professional speaking. I used to go up to the front of my church behind the podium and just imagine myself, preaching to the congregation. But as I grew up, I kind of lost my way. I wasn't sure exactly how to get into that profession. So I did the next best thing, which was I got into nursing. So and got all the teasing that goes with male nurses. And but I enjoyed a 4-year career in that. And it really suited my personality, because I like to care for people, and I like the idea of doing that for a living. But 4 years in, I realized that if I really wanted to pursue that dream, I would have to transition into business. And at that time, I was reading a lot of books. One of them by Zig Ziglar, which is Secrets of Closing the Sale. And I realized, hey, I actually have no idea how to sell. So, but I know I need it. So I jumped into the deep end and got myself a sales job. And I'll tell you, for the first 3 months, I was absolutely terrified. Now, I'm a natural introvert with a side of people pleaser. So it was incredibly difficult to just pick up that phone and call existing clients. It wasn't even cold calling. But 3 months in, I managed to just persevere, just focusing myself on the end goal. And an amazing thing happened. Like my brain started to calm down and realize that, hey, after I made that sales call, I didn't drop down and die. So I was able to continue doing it, and actually made a successful career in sales, doing it ethically, with all of my values intact, while still not fully coming out of my introversion. Like I didn't have to become a different person, is what I'm trying to say. From there, I started this business, Sales Ethos, with the goal of helping other people who are going into the sales profession, who want to maintain their values and who don't want to necessarily become a different person in order to achieve that.
Yeah, nice. And I love the fact you said you're an introvert. You're able to hang on to that introversion without having to change your values or change the way you have to be, which is a really interesting point, because my experience with a lot of certainly bigger companies, and you mentioned people pleaser, there's a lot of people that come into an organization and feel as if in order for them to fit into a culture, and particularly a sales team is a culture, and sometimes it's a world within itself, they have to change the way they are. And that can actually create a lot of issues, particularly around ethics and values, that in order for them to be successful, they have to start doing some things that perhaps go against those values. What's your experience been? Because I know you've done a lot of training and continue to do a lot of training. When you come up against people who are saying, hey, my boss is asking me to do this because it's all about the number, but I feel as if I'm going to be going against my ethics and going against my values, how do we actually cut through that?
Yeah, that's a very unfortunate situation. And actually, one of the organizations that I worked for was pretty much that description. And we were at total loggerheads. I would invite the executive into the meetings with me, and he would just outright lie about our capabilities.
Mm.
I was just shocked. So that meant that we had to part ways ultimately. Um, and I would probably suggest that for any sales professionals out there who want to maintain their ethics, and if you're working for someone who insists that you break those ethics in order to make targets, it's probably time to look for another organization to work for. Because I mean, how long can you really work in that environment where you're experiencing what psychologists call cognitive dissonance, right? A conflict between what you're doing and what your inner values are. It creates a lot of stress. And I can't imagine what it would be like trying to live like that and to work like that every day.
It's but you know what? It's interesting how many people actually become used to it, to the point where they allow themselves to change. And I've seen it happen. You've been working with some people, they've gone off and have worked for another organization thinking that the grass was greener on the other side.
Yeah.
They've changed. You see them again and you think, wow, there's something fundamentally different about this person. And I'm big on, cultures and making sure we've got the right culture, doing the right thing, setting the standards of excellence. But there are organizations out there that pretty much, and I'll say this respectfully, they brainwash their team, they brainwash their people, and they expect them to drink the Kool-Aid thinking that they have the best product and the best service, and there is all the competition has to be squashed. And so we and this is why we're having this conversation, because we need to bring ethics back to the surface. Now, what's fascinating about this is a lot of organizations, such as the boss you were just describing, they will believe, at least they'll tell themselves, that they have ethics. And they'll say it's ethical because it's a means to an end. Because as long as we get the service into the customer, as long as we sell them the product, we're doing them a service, right? Really?
Yeah, I've heard a saying once. So I'm a bit of a comic book nerd, and there was a really interesting saying that every villain in their own mind is the hero of their own story. So sometimes they just don't have awareness that, hey, you're doing the wrong thing.
No, that's right. And if you don't have somebody to mentor you who has that strong conviction of this is what I stand for, and when something goes against that value, if we don't have the courage to call it out, and what we're actually doing is we're now starting to set a new standard. Now, that's on us. And certainly if you're a sales leader doing that, and you're doing that to survive, you're doing that because you don't want to lose your opportunity to make commission, and you've got security in the job. Think about this, why you're doing it.
Yeah, and you've actually brought to my mind some ancient wisdom that what would it profit a man if he were to gain the whole world, but to lose his soul in the process? And that's really what it is. That if you're going to the same job day in, day out, you hate what you're doing, you hate yourself for it. Like, what is the real cost of working in that job? I think that's something that really helps put things into perspective.
Oh, it does. It does. Now, there'll be people who are listening to this who are actually not in sales, right? So I've got listeners who are not in sales. They might be in leadership, but they just happen to come across this podcast. When you talk to most people around sales and you ask the question, what do you think of sales and what do you think of salespeople? It's very rare that they'll actually use salespeople and ethics in the same sentence, right?
Yeah.
But they'll use they're not ethical. They just push the snaky old salesman sort of connotations come up. Yes. From your perspective in working with a number of organizations now and coming from an ethical perspective, what's your take on this, and what are you seeing in the marketplace, and how are people resonating with the ethical concept?
Yeah, I've been very fortunate that the vast majority of people that I meet actually want to do the right thing to begin with. There's only been very rare occasions where they're only, revenue centered. So it seems that most businesses are getting it nowadays that you need to be ethical in order to be successful. Like there's no shortcut, and it's not should we be ethical. It's like that's the only option if you want to run a business in today's economy. There's no other option. social media has really been the nail in that coffin, because the moment you do something dodgy, people are going to talk about it on the internet, social media. Reputation just spreads so fast. And that's ultimately going to be the value of the brand and the trust that people put in the brand. So yeah, from that perspective, I've been very fortunate to only work with people who wanted to do the right thing. Yeah. But their challenge is usually how. It's like, how do we be ethical and effective at the same time? So their difficulty is that they'll put the foot off the pedal too much.
Yeah.
Like they'll hold back on being assertive because they're afraid of being pushy. And that's why it's very important to differentiate the two. Mm-hmm. So that's part of my challenge, like being able to help them to see how being assertive is actually in clients' best interests. And that is an ethical thing to do.
Well, it is, because it comes down to, obviously, you've got to have a good belief in your product and your service, but you've also got to do your due diligence and think about, is the customer that I'm working with, do they actually have a problem that they want to solve? Or am I trying to create a problem that I want them to solve and retrofit my product?
Yeah, absolutely. It comes back to the whole selling ice to Eskimos scenario.
Well, it does. It does.
unless the Eskimos need some sort of special ice, or there's something different about the ice that you're selling.
That's it. Because when you talk about ethics and effectiveness and being assertive, because there'll be salespeople listening to this right now that's saying, man, my sales manager, he's just, or she's just riding me really hard. I'm behind on my quarterly target. My pipeline is not 3x my target. It's like 1.5x my target. And it's just pressure, right? So when people are under pressure, and sometimes this is a survival instinct, they can sometimes start doing things that perhaps they wouldn't normally do at rest or in a normal course of the day. You know, from that perspective, we've got somebody listening that's in that sort of predicament, and we're now talking about being ethical, being effective, being efficient, but also being assertive. What sort of message do we give them? How do we actually get them to understand that, you know what, you've got to have a sense of urgency, but also you've got to do it ethically?
Yeah, it's a very difficult situation to be in, and I fully empathize with those that are struggling. But my suggestion would be to keep your eyes on the long term, and not to sacrifice by using short-term results, because your short-term tactics may get results, you know, in a month or 3 months, but then you're going to have to repeat that process in the next 3 months if you haven't had the long-term mindset. And I would say that if you really wanted to dial back the difficulty of ethical selling, the number one thing that I would suggest is to lower your self-orientation as much as possible. That means putting aside your agenda, that thinking about your quota, and you just fully focus on the person that you're speaking to, fully listen to them, hear their problems, hear what their situation is, try to relate to the person, try to solve their problems. And then paradoxically, when you put them first instead of your quota, your effectiveness increases. They're more likely to listen to you. They're more likely to take up your solution. And that will serve your quota in the end. So it's like the priority is only difference by one. So there's priority 1 and there's priority 2. You can either put yourself on number 1, or you can put your client at number 1. But the distance between 1 and 2 is massive in terms of the actual how it plays out. So reduce your self-orientation by being client focused, and people will love you for it, and they will reward you for it.
Yeah. It's as you're talking there, you're talking about short term, and I'm just thinking back to all the sales managers that I had reporting to, or I was reporting to, where the closer we got to the end of the month, or the closer we got to the end of the quarter, the more regular the cadence meetings were, where you had to literally sit down and go through a forensic investigation as to where these deals were at, what's the probability, what are you going to do to get it over the line, what's your gap closure strategy, et cetera, which then led to a lot of short-term strategies. And the companies sometimes would say, right, we're going to do a fire sale. we're gonna give a discount, right? So you're conditioning customers now on how to deal with you just to get a number. And I talk about this all the time, just to get a number via fake timeline. Right now, people listen to this, or we have to have end of the month, end of the quarter, end of the phone. I get that, right? Because you've got to report to the market, etc. But if you take a leaf out of what Simon Sinek talks about now in his infinite game, the game never stops. So as I often say to sales teams today, your customers are going to be buying tomorrow. Just because they don't purchase today, they're still potentially going to be open to purchasing tomorrow. So how about you treat them like that? And how about, as you say, focus your attention on them, because some things might happen in terms of you'll be looked after.
Absolutely, and that's really a question of whether you want to put your timing as the priority or their timing, because some products are dependent on when is the best time to implement. Like so for sales training, I'm getting this a lot towards the end of the year. Oh, we don't want to start anything now because we're going to go on holiday and we won't be able to put it into practice. So I have to accept that as just a reality of clients' timing. And yeah, I could compromise my prices, try to get them over the line now, but then I'm sacrificing the profitability for the long term. And I'm also demonstrating my self-orientation and rearing its ugly head, the neediness and the desperation.
That's it.
So that's not a very good way to position oneself when dealing with clients.
No, because particularly in Australia, people's BS meters are pretty good, and they can smell a level of desperation. And I don't know about you, but customers know when they've got a salesperson in front of them who desperately needs a deal to get them over the line, because they have to make quota, because they've got their boss ready right in their back to get it done really, really quickly, which, by the way, puts the onus back onto the customer and the power in the customer's hands to say, right, you want this deal, what else are you going to give me?
Yes. The whole seesaw has been tilted. Who has the power?
Unbelievable. So one of the other things that I was curious to explore with you, Ben, was you do sales training, but focusing on emotional intelligence, which is a really interesting topic in and of itself, because fair to say that a lot of sales teams don't necessarily have EQ at the top of, I guess, their capability list. Having said that, more and more companies are now spending more time looking at EQ as a, I guess, as an enabler when they bring people in. But let's just talk about how important that is when it comes to selling today, and how it fits into being ethical.
Yeah, sure. And that's where we get into a little bit of dangerous territory, I think, because having emotional intelligence means understanding how people function from an emotional level. And one of the things that we have to understand is that emotions equals action. So if we're able to stir up a certain emotion in a person, they will likely act on what we're asking from them. Yeah. So these techniques are really powerful. And for me as a trainer, I have to be very careful who I teach these techniques to, because they can be used for manipulation, or they can be used in the client's best interest, like just to account for what their preferences are and so forth. But it is certainly extremely important. It always has been, but it's just been brought to the forefront now, because we have the scientific methodologies to discover why it's effective. So just for example, in Robert Cialdini's book Influence, a must read for every salesperson and every leader.
Absolutely.
The principle of reciprocity. So when you do something nice for someone, they feel indebted in a way to do something nice for you. So when you walk into a car dealership, the first thing they do is to offer you a coffee, because that small gesture triggers the emotional response that we want to purchase from them. So that can be used, as an act of sincerity. Like, you just have, if you're genuinely a giving person and you are very generous with the person that you meet, then they'll want to reciprocate. You can certainly be mindful of that. But a con person could also use that same technique, which is why, like I said, we have to be very careful. That's just a very, very small example of a very powerful emotional trigger that we need to be conscious of.
Because there are a lot of people out there that, and I do exactly the same thing. Whatever technique we're going to be teaching you, and a lot of it is like just physiology, body language and all that sort of stuff, which is linked to social awareness and self-awareness and self-management. Use it for good, mate. Use it for good. Don't use it for evil, because you've got to remember that at the end of the day, all you've got is your reputation. And from my perspective, this is where ethics become really important. So would you, and this is the test, right? I often say this to salespeople. If you have a relationship with your customer, would your customer either send you a Christmas card, or would they invite you to like a family barbecue towards the end of the year? So, because a lot of salespeople say, and I had this when I was a sales leader, they said, "Oh, we've got this fantastic relationship with this customer. Ben loves us. He comes to coffee, he buys me coffee. We go to lunches, we go to events." I said, "Well, would Ben invite you to his family to have Christmas dinner?" Not quite sure. Okay, so maybe the relationship you think you have is not actually a relationship you actually do have. So now here's what I'm not saying. So for those listening who are in sales, I'm not actually saying try and get into your customer's Christmas family dinner. But just think about it though. But from an ethics point of view, if you become a trusted confident, and people throw around this concept of trusted advisor left, right, center. It's like you get it from a cornflakes packet, right? Everybody's talking about it. Yeah. But when you think about it, a trusted advisor is, am I trusted as an individual? Would my client trust me with somebody who is near and dear to them, or would they not? That's a test. So we're not saying you have to build those relationships to that level, but that's the test. So that's for me, it's always about, when I'm doing something, am I doing it for the right reasons? Am I doing it ethically? And is my reputation being enhanced with this person?
Absolutely. And trust in itself is an emotion as well. And that's why we have to be aware of that, and also be aware of how people are gauging whether they trust us or not. Yeah. Because let's just say someone didn't know better and they were trying to earn trust, and so they use the phrase "trust me." It's going to have the exactly opposite effect of its intention. So there's an interesting book by the name of The Trusted Advisor by David Maister, and he created the trust equation. And I thought, and I teach this all the time now because it's just so powerful. On the top, you have credibility, which is how much you know your stuff and your background and so forth. Reliability, which is keeping your promises. And intimacy, which is the relationship, like the fondness they have of you. And then it's divided by self-orientation. Yeah. Which is what we were referring to before. Yeah. So if you want to have the biggest impact, be others focused. Don't be self-centric. And that is one of the truest ways that people will judge whether you are trustworthy or not, by how much you care about them. That's it. Which leads me to, and I'm glad you said that, because I also teach that a lot, and it's such a powerful thing. Because a lot of my approaches around leadership, especially when I talk to sales leaders, is this concept of servant leadership, which is just that. Right? I often say that leadership is not about you. It never has been and never will be. In fact, you are the least important person in your team. But the paradox to that is you become the most important person in your team if you have the ethics in place, if you know what you stand for, you know what your values are, and if you place all of your emphasis on serving your team and serving your customers. So this is not being self-serving, and this is not being a servant, right? So we're not talking about creating codependency here. It's about, how do I best serve my team, which means, you know what, I'm going to have the conversation that I need to have when I need to have it. I'm going to be assertive with a customer when I need to be assertive, because that's the right thing to do and that's the ethical thing to do. Yes. It may result in a short-term challenge in some cases, but yes, over the long term, I now remain consistent with my ethics and with my values, which will only come back and pay dividends down the track. So absolutely, it's the servitude that I think is the most important thing. So that automatically kind of takes away, at least from my perspective, the danger around self-orientation. It does, and it's probably one of the greatest paradoxes of all time, servant leadership, because that's not how we perceive leaders, but it's the greatest mindset. Absolutely. Now, I'm really curious, with all the stuff that you do, talking about ethics and being assertive and being effective, having a long-term focus. How is that? What's the question? How is that received by some organizations? Is there challenges? Because in some cases there'll be
sales teams and sales organizations who have been used to operating in a certain fashion, and it might be to some degree functional for them. It might be working. That is, they're getting some results, but they know there's a different level, and they know at their core that if they can just become a little bit more ethical, do a few more things slightly differently, they can get some improvement. What sort of challenges or pushback have you found, and are you continuing to find in the work that you do?
Yeah, I've actually been very fortunate that the type of clients that I attract are the ones who want to do things the right way, right from the beginning.
Yeah.
So yeah, the ones that don't, they hear my pitch about being ethical and they just think, oh, I don't want this guy. At least that's my assumption anyway.
Ethical and introverted. Come on. And a nurse as well. Come on.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think like attracts like, and yeah, I haven't come across too many situations where there's pushback. But that said, the greatest pushback that I've found is actually comes back to individual attitudes. So when I'm coaching those individuals and they ask me, "Oh, how long is this going to take?" I know I'm in trouble because they're not going to listen to a thing that I'm saying, and it goes back to the growth mindset.
Yeah.
Some people just are so fixated on, they're not open to learning. And that's where the phrase, you can't teach a dog, an old dog new tricks, it comes from those stubborn people, not from the old dogs. Old dogs are perfectly teachable.
That's it. It's the lack of willingness to learn and be open to something new, because and part of that may well be self-preservation when you think about it, which is, oh my God. And we talk about like imposter syndrome a lot.
Oh, yes.
What if I'm actually not as good as perhaps I've been giving the impression that I am, and the status I have within the organization? Geez, what if I find out and they find out that I'm different?
Yeah, it's tricky. And imposter syndrome is actually quite an interesting topic as well, I feel, because I'm coming across more and more people who express that they have this challenge. And especially women who in sales positions, like they just have a tendency to self-doubt. Maybe men are more delusional. I could say that being a guy.
That's it.
But yeah, that's another interesting area, and I would probably say that like from a psychology perspective, we're really bad at self-assessing how good we are.
Yeah.
Like this is called the Dunning-Kruger effect.
Yeah.
If you want to look it up. So dumb people don't know they're dumb, but smart people also don't know how smart they are, because they look at people way above themselves, and then they think, oh, I must not be that good because I see that other one.
It's all the comparison game, isn't it? Which is a really, really dangerous game. And I say to people all the time, the only person you need to compare yourself with is the person staring back at you in the mirror. That's it.
Exactly.
And just think about, how can I get better today than I was yesterday, and how can I get better tomorrow than I was yesterday? Now, put that into context now, and let's just talk about people who potentially are introverted, who found themselves in sales, because often introverted people in sales don't necessarily go together. But before we press record on this, I was saying that some of the best salespeople I've ever worked with were actually quite introverted, but it meant that they had some power. And one of those key power moves was their ability to listen. Love you to talk about your perspective, because you are a self-confessed introvert. Because we then want to also sort of reach into particularly salespeople that are listening to this right now who might have a tendency to be introverted, or is not as outgoing as perhaps others would like them to be. How do we utilize things like LinkedIn to be more effective in our sales campaigns? So let's talk about introversion first, right? So,
sure.
And I don't know, this is part of your story, or what's your take on this? Because a lot of people look at it and say it's a contradiction. Sales, introversion doesn't go together, right? So
yeah, it definitely doesn't fit the usual stereotype, what we see on TV, like Wolf of Wall Street and all those other movies. But I would say that the superpower of introverts is our ability to listen. So I've got a lot of extroverted friends. Like when I catch up with them, I will ask them one question and I'll listen for the next 15 minutes. But this is exceptionally useful in sales situations, because once you understand their circumstances and the implications, their problems, their pain points, their goals, then you can frame the entire presentation around what you've learned in that data collection stage. But the other great thing about this listening skill is that you're actually communicating to the other person that they are important. And they're going to like you a lot more when they feel important. They're going to feel cared about. So that's the major strength of introversion. But with every strength comes, challenges. And same thing for extroverts. So extroverts have some advantages in sales situations.
Yeah.
Especially during the presentation phase. That's where extroverts really shine.
Yeah.
But during the consultative phase, that's where they need to adapt their behavior a little bit, and listen more. So likewise for introverts, like their key challenge is not in the consultative phase; it's actually in the presentation phase and in the closing phase, when you need to have a greater degree of assertiveness in order to get the commitment from the client. So that's where I wouldn't say you need to change who you are in order to, but think of it as just a skill. Yeah. Presenting is a skill. And for me as an introvert, I had to learn every social skill that I have the hard way. I was the socially awkward kid growing up. Like, I would be at the party and sitting by myself in the corner. Like, that's who I was. That's who I was. I had to learn everything the hard way through study and through experimentation, and just, sometimes we do have to step outside our comfort zone a little bit. Yes. So when it comes to presenting, you have to really practice, really know your stuff, and learn from professional speakers how to be good at presenting. And for the closing stage, to a certain extent, we have to overcome that reluctance, but just keeping in mind that our reason for asking for the sale is for the client's benefit, not for our own.
Yeah.
Our benefit is a side note.
Well, and if we do that well, because that I think I used to be introverted myself, but I reckon I've changed over time through practice, right, and through getting more confident, and then being able to ask the questions. But I think you're right in saying that at the closing phase, there's a lot of people that are still afraid to actually ask for the close. They almost just assume and hope that the client will, through some form of osmosis or telepathy conversations, say, yes, what's the next part? Where do I sign? Or what do we do next? Which to an introvert is music to their ears, because they don't actually have to ask. So, Mr. Customer, Mrs. Customer, would you like to purchase this product or this service? But that's where it can be a challenge, because they think, oh, what if they say no? Which again, imposter syndrome can come in, and self-doubt can come in. And I think what you're saying is so true, that if you actually put your focus on the customer, the problem you're solving, and it presupposes, of course, that you've got a really strong belief in the fact you've got a solution to solve that problem, then it's just a natural consequence of that conversation to say, well, the next step is this. And what's the worst thing that somebody's going to say if you ask them, hey, based on what you've seen, would you like to proceed? And they say no. Can you handle that? You're not going to self-combust.
But our brains tell us otherwise. That's the problem.
Yes, because we allocate failure to that, right, or rejection to that. And then part of it might be, oh shit, I've got to go back and talk to my sales manager because I promised I was going to get this deal, and now I've got to go back and say I didn't get it because of X, Y, Z. What am I going to say?
Yeah, the fear is real.
Well, it is. But the only way to do that, and this is a big tip for introverts, is to put yourself in those positions. And this is the big thing: remove yourself from the pressure of having to get the outcome. Because if you actually go through the process, if you believe and you've used all the stuff we've been talking about today, if you are ethical in what you're doing, if you believe you've got a solution that can genuinely help this customer, and you ask the question and they say no, well, that's their choice. I'll still take responsibility for that, but I've got to remove myself from the pressure of having to convince them, because you know what? If I leave them with that impression of increase, to say I've left an indelible mark on them, maybe next week, next month, they'll still remember me. I'll stay top of mind. Maybe just now they weren't in the right part of their buying cycle. Who knows? Yeah,
actually, you've raised a really interesting point, because one of the things that that I often counsel people about is their mental stress levels. And when they have those targets, that's of course going to increase their stress. In order to help these people, I point their attention to what I call circles of influence. So if you imagine a small circle, that's something that we have direct influence over. So we have direct influence over our behavior, our choice of words, and our self-learning, everything associated with ourselves. Then there's an outer circle. And that outer circle is where we have influence. So we don't directly control those things, but we definitely have a part in affecting how it works, right? So that might be trying to influence a person to buy, or it might be influencing how your manager deals with you. And then on the outer circle, we have the area of no influence. And for some people, they actually spend an inordinate amount of time in that area. And that creates a lot of psychological stress. So they're watching the news, they're seeing, reports of wars and famine and earthquakes, and they're getting really stressed out about it. And it creates a very stressful state on the inside. So when it comes to sales situations, like you were describing, if they're focused too much on the number and not, which is, the area of influence, and sometimes out of their area of influence, then that's going to create a lot of psychological stress because they have no power over influencing that outcome. Focus on what you can control, not what you can't.
It's a great point. And if you remove yourself from the pressure of having to get the outcome, that is having to close the sale, then all of a sudden a natural consequence of that conversation will be sales will start to come in. But here's what we're not saying: that as a salesperson, you can't get away with not asking for the sale. You just can't assume that the customer, based on your presentation, is going to lean forward and say, "So Ben, what's the next step? Where do I sign?" Because you sometimes do have to ask the question, which is where assertiveness comes in, right?
Yes, it does.
You can start to build that muscle, because that's if everything you've done is ethical, then it's the customer's actually, and think about this, the customer's going to be expecting you to ask them the direct question, "Would you like to purchase?" Now, if you don't ask that question, then you might have actually now started to detract from the reputation you've built with that person, because you haven't asked that question, and they leave with a little bit of dissatisfaction.
Yeah, absolutely.
Ask you.
Absolutely, and it's your responsibility to do that, because it's your selling process that you need to lead them through. They don't know what your process is, so you got to show them. The way that I look at it is that if you have the ability to help someone and you don't, what kind of person are you?
That's it. And when you think about, with that as well, a lot of the challenges that I see within sales teams is also an objection around price. But here's the thing: it's not an objection that the customer has about the price. It's a self-objection that we might have about our own price or our own value. And whether that's yourself providing coaching, mentoring, training like what we do, or you're selling a product, you think, wow, what is the perceived value here? And am I minimizing this by trying to provide a discount? Or am I saying, and the price is, and keep it really under wraps, hoping you get it through really quickly? I know you do a lot of work on this, and love to get your thoughts on pricing and the importance of standing tall with the price and therefore the value you're providing.
Absolutely. Pricing psychology is a massive area of study. And it's very interesting because, if you think about it, what is the value of something? Like, let's just say a bottle of water. If you buy it from the supermarket, you can get it for less than $1. And if you buy it from the cinemas, they charge you $5 for it. So what's the difference with the value of each situation? The ultimate answer is that the value of something is as much as a person is willing to pay. You can put your so-called antique on eBay and put the price $10,000 on it, but unless someone else is willing to shell out for that 10,000, it's not worth that much, right? Yeah. So the market ultimately determines how much things are worth. But it's a really interesting area because a lot of people feel a sense of shame when they quote high prices. I didn't say expensive, by the way. I just said the price is high, right? Yeah. Expensive implies that it's overpriced. Yeah. And a lot of that stems, I think, from the way that we think about and we feel about money and about business.
Yeah.
Because we're living in a time now that people are questioning capitalism, like the very system that we live in and we're enjoying the fruits of. Like they look at the big corporations with the corrupt CEOs and then think that all business is bad.
Yeah.
When in fact, business is the reason that we are enjoying the amount of prosperity that we do, to the point that our poor people are not actually poor by comparison.
Correct.
I literally live next door to government housing, and their houses look nicer than mine.
There you go.
So that's our poor people, folks. But the reason that our government can afford, such nice arrangements is because they're charging taxes, and who's paying the taxes? It's businesses, it's people, right?
Yeah.
So when the economy grows and when businesses prosper, everybody prospers. And so from that perspective, this is looking at the big picture, but bringing it back to pricing. We have to recognize that just because something is high priced doesn't necessarily mean it's unethical.
Yeah.
There are, of course, cases of unethical high pricing, such as that CEO in America who's jacked up the price of the AIDS medication. That's a whole story of unethical proportions.
Absolutely.
When it comes to pricing and in selling situations, I think the most important principle to remember is that whatever your price is, you have to deliver many times more in value than what you're charging. So sales training is one of those great professions where we can say, okay, let's just say we're charging $20,000 for something, for a training course, but the training results in a growth of $200,000 or $2 million worth of additional revenue. So then, do you think the client's going to care if we charge even an extra few $1,000s for that service? Of course not, because it's a no-brainer. Yeah, exactly. So whatever you're selling, you have to be able to demonstrate how you're going to deliver more value than what your price is.
And it's a great equation, because it's a cliche, I know, but value is always in the eyes of the beholder. And
yes,
and often salespeople have a challenge with wanting to be the cheapest in the marketplace. And part of that is conditioning of the human psyche as well, because you just have to look at all the advertising you see on TV. Bunnings is a classic example. E&S now, we're never going to be beaten on price, or the lowest prices is just the beginning, et cetera, et cetera. So we are almost conditioned to believe low price, discount. And as I say, salespeople all the time, don't discount. Don't discount. Maintain the range with your price, because you've got to believe that what you're giving in terms of the price the customer's going to pay, the value that they're going to get is X, 3X or 4X or 5X, then you know what? I'm not going to discount. And I'm sorry, I don't discount. So when people ask me for coaching and training and they ask, is there a volume discount, et cetera, no, it is what it is. This is it. There's no discounting. And most of the time they say, oh, okay, but at least they're asked the question.
Yeah. Oftentimes people just want to feel like they're getting a good deal.
Well, yes. And part of that would be, in my head, I'm thinking, okay, what haven't I done yet to articulate the value? I've got a bit more work to do there if they're asking me a question around discounting.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, there's 2 points. There is the value, but there is also the differentiation.
Yeah.
So one of the key reasons that people ask for discounts is because they cannot tell the difference between your offer versus a competitive offer. They look exactly the same.
Yeah.
And if 2 things are exactly the same, and why wouldn't you go with the cheaper option? So I faced this problem, quite viscerally in my first sales role when I was selling domain names.
Yeah.
Like the most boring product on the planet. And that's literally a commodity. Like it made no difference who you bought it from. And we were up to 7 times the price of our competitors. So coming from an ethical perspective, I was wondering, how am I going to sell this and still maintain my values? So what I said to every client that I spoke to was that when you buy a domain name with us, that you're not just getting a domain name, you're getting my direct line. And I'm willing to spend the time with you to provide whatever advice you need from a website point of view, so that you get the full value for your investment. And people bought into that. So and I spent the time with them, even though it wasn't my job. I was a salesperson, right?
But that's the value, right? You're providing.
Absolutely.
Which is, and for many people that could just justify maybe not the 7 times the value, but in many people's eyes it would have, because hey, they don't get that with somebody else. So I get Ben's time, I get Ben's attention. And can provide value. Well,
if you think about it, like if they were to go to a web developer and ask them for their consulting, like they would charge $250 an hour.
Yeah.
So from that perspective, I was cheap.
That's it. So it's a good point. So the message there is, don't discount, and price accordingly. Price according to what you can deliver, but don't overinflate your prices. So and maintain the range in terms of what you believe to be true and what you believe to be valuable. Now,
absolutely,
as we approach it, we're nearly on an hour, man. You can talk. Just looking at the time. Hey, I'd love to because you and I use LinkedIn a lot. And I'm always interested in getting perspectives on LinkedIn and certainly from a selling point of view, how LinkedIn can be used, I guess, more effectively as an outreach method in our sales campaign. So I love your take on this. If there's anything that the listeners can get from this, fantastic. I might even learn something as well. And I use LinkedIn extensively.
Sure.
Love to get a sense from you in terms of the power of LinkedIn as part of ethical selling.
Yeah, it's a great tool and a platform, but it's going to have a fairly limited lifespan. In the same way that cold calling once upon a time was the method for outreach, LinkedIn is now the method. So it is extremely effective because we can reach the targeted audiences. We don't have to call through receptionists and so forth to reach the people that we want to. But unfortunately, a lot of people are using it in a very ineffective way. And so that's creating a lot of noise. It's creating a lot of annoyance. And if you want to cut through the noise, we have to be mindful of a couple of principles. One is that we have to be different. You mustn't use phrases that everybody else is using, such as, I looked at your profile and I was very impressed.
Have you got one of those? Have you got some of those as well? I thought it was just me getting them.
The sincerity level just drops instantly. So you have to be different. You have to sound different, but more importantly, you have to make it personal. So the person receiving the message has to feel that you actually made some effort to look at their profile and to actually make an intelligent comment about it. Or so it has to be different. It has to be personal, but you also have to offer something of value upfront. What I usually suggest is providing some sort of research, like collated research. That's something that's interesting, relevant, and valuable to your target audience. Yeah. So what I used to do is when I was selling search engine optimization, very, very crowded market, I was selling to digital marketing managers. They actually took up meetings with me because I offered to update them about what's coming up with Google. So back in the day, it was Penguin Update. And so I'd say, Penguin Update is coming. I'd love to fill you in on what's going to happen so that you can prepare and you don't get penalized. And people loved it. Like they took up meetings with me. I couldn't sell straight away, especially since a lot of these organizations were okay with their SEO. But it led to creating the first step in the relationship. And if you're doing business with larger companies, you have to have the long game in mind. You get in early before they need you. Then when the need arises, then guess who they're going to call? The person that's been giving them value all this time. So have the giving mindset when you're doing this outreach. What can you give in exchange for their time?
Love it. It's when you think about it, it's pretty common sense based, isn't
it? Common sense is not always common practice.
I get so many, and because I'm a coach, because I'm a mentor, because I'm a podcaster, I get all sorts of different reach out from all these different organizations. And in the I mean, granted, one thing they do well is they at least do a connection request that's personalized. But within that personalization, it's all about them. Right? It's not about me. The only thing they might say is what you said at the upfront. Oh, I looked at your profile. It's very impressive. Then they go into, we are a digital marketing agency, blah, 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 connect. Then if I connect, because sometimes I just do it just to see what happens next. So I'm really curious in terms of how people use LinkedIn as part of their sales strategy to see what happens after the connection is accepted. And many of them instantaneously will come back and say, hey, let's jump on a call. This is what I got, blah, blah, blah. And I'm thinking, really? You don't even know me. You don't even know me, and you're trying to enter a relationship.
Yeah.
Don't do that. Don't do that. So it's and my view on LinkedIn is it's a slow game. It's a long game.
It is.
And you can spend shitloads of money on advertising and stuff like that. But if you're going to use LinkedIn as a sales strategy tool, make sure it's ethical. Make sure you're reaching out to the target market. And as you said, make sure you're giving value to the person. And that is, it could be a case study. It could be a white paper. It could be something. It could just be a suggestion. It could be an introduction to somebody else in your network that might be able to help them in some capacity. And people will always remember you, and it'll come back.
Absolutely. The other thing to just watch out for, as a quick note, is you can be on one of two extremes. You can either be too commercial, as in directly promoting yourself, or you can be too relational. So sometimes I'll get messages saying, "Hi Ben, how's business?" I'm thinking, what do you want?
Well, that's interesting. I got one from a guy from, funnily enough, the Philippines this week that I'd connected with 12 months ago. And his message was pretty much that. It was like, oh, hi, Darren. We haven't spoken for a while. Well, no, we haven't spoken for ages. Just wanted to check in to see how business is going. So I thought, and I looked at the history, and there's no history with us. We've connected, right? So I went back to him and said, oh, hi, insert the blank. Have we actually spoken? Because I don't believe we've spoken. So be ethical, right? Be genuine.
Yeah.
Be human.
That's it.
So, mate, hey, as we wrap up, great conversation. Really enjoyed this. For people listening, a couple of things. One is from an ethical point of view, and all this is about sales ethos and sales ethics. What would be a key message you want to leave people around selling with ethics? But also, where can people find you and find more about Ben Lai and what you do?
Sure. One of my favorite phrases comes from my hero, Jim Rohn. And he was the one who mentored Tony Robbins, by the way. So he said, or earn more than you need so you can help others in need. And I think that's a really beautiful motivator and drive to be successful and to earn as much as you possibly can, not so that you can buy fancy stuff. If you want to do that, that's fine. But, you know, that's not a very motivating goal. In terms of where to find me, salesethos.com.au, or feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn, Ben Lai, Lai. More than happy to have a virtual coffee or a real life coffee if you're based in Melbourne.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Awesome. So hey, really enjoy this conversation. It's good to work with other people and talk to other people who are in the same industry doing the same thing. We might be doing things slightly differently, but at our core, we are like kindred spirits. So if we can continue to, I guess, spread the gospel and allow people to look at sales from a more ethical perspective, because it is one of the greatest professions. And if we can do this, we can affect so many people's lives. It's phenomenal. So Ben, greatly appreciate you jumping on, and we'll have to do it again, mate.
Thanks very much, Darren. Really appreciate it.
All the best, buddy.